Hello, Internet friends, and welcome back to Love-Hate Relationship, an opinionated podcast by opinionated people. I'm Andy Boel.
And I'm Alex Ruiz, and we're here to brighten your day, anger your soul, and tell you how to live your life. In that order.
Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Andy, I wanted to start with this because it amused me to no end. Anyone who follows our Twitter account knows that I consistently post about just how disappointed I expect my mother to be when she eventually hears this podcast. And I got us set up on TuneIn Radio from the beginning because I knew that it was the radio app, podcast app that she used. So, Andrew, my mother finally heard our podcast.
Oh, no. Oh, God,
yes. No. So she says that she is very proud of the both of us,
Aww.
For endeavoring on this great creative project. So there is that.
But...
she is very disappointed in our language. But she made a point to say that she thinks you are doing a better job at this than I am.
Oh, no.
She's like, Andy doesn't have nearly as big of a problem with it as you do. She did, I will say this, she complimented the audio. She thinks that it sounds very crisp. She thinks that you have a great radio voice.
Oh, that means the world to me. Thank you.
Yes, and she is, she's very proud of the fact that we are so good at having a back and forth that we stop and allow each other to talk. And she's especially proud of me for giving you the room to talk because I talk so much and so loudly and never give anyone a break. So she's very, very proud of the both of us. So thank you, Mom. I love you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you,
maybe
Mrs.
go easy
Ruiz.
Maybe be careful about who in the family you share this with. I know not all of them speak a ton of English, but most of them do. So this, you can share it if you want, but be careful. So far, I have no listens in Colombia. But yeah, I wanted to share that with you, Andy, because that just brightened my day yesterday.
Yeah.
That we have my mother's qualified approval.
That really makes me happy. Thank you so much, Mrs. Ruiz. That means the world to me.
Such a kind, polite boy.
I try. Yeah, for what it's worth, my folks know about this, but I don't think any of them have bothered to listen to it. And as far as my wife's family is concerned, this doesn't exist. And that's my choice.
Well, it's also funny because, so Stephanie told me about how she, I guess, talked to her parents about this and kind of said the same disclaimers I gave my mom.
Yeah.
Like, by the way, they have terrible potty mouths and they talk about this, talk about that. And apparently, Stephanie's mother's reaction was she just kind of went, Stephanie, I know who you married. And we're sitting here like, that couldn't have been better if she just straight up sang, I know who I married. It was so perfect.
Oh, wonderful.
Hamilton reference, folks.
Yeah. I'm surprised we haven't had more of them, to be honest.
I feel like there's certain topics, I would love to do a love section on Hamilton, for instance, but some things feel obvious. I don't know, maybe it's the little bit of me that still, grew up listening to, indie metal and punk and is like, oh, I don't want to do the super mainstream thing. Yes, of course I love Hamilton, but, it's almost like if I did Phantom of the Opera as, my big favorite or, a big love, and I'm like, I like Phantom of the Opera a lot, don't get me wrong. It's not a favorite of mine, but I do enjoy it. But it's almost like, oh, sure, am I going to do the biggest selling Broadway musical in all of history? The most well-known, most quoted, most sung-out thing ever, or am I going to try and give some attention to Sondheim's Assassins, which fewer people know about?
Sure.
So yeah, I mean,
you're giving me ideas, is what I'm saying.
Oh Jesus. I guess eventually we'll get to these things because, at a certain point we're gonna run out of non-obvious stuff.
Right.
So, maybe at some point we'll get over ourselves and just do some more obvious things. Even one of the loves that you talked about doing, not the one you chose for this, but one of the loves you talked about doing is super well known, and I feel no qualms about going into that one. Although I'd rather give it, some time and space. That might be another triple love later.
Maybe.
We'll see.
Well, so just be on the lookout for the quintuple love special on Hamilton, dear listener.
Oh.
We're gonna invite a panel.
Oh God. I don't know how many panels you've been to at like conventions or anything like that, but a podcast panel sounds dangerous.
I mean, it's become the thing to do like podcast live shows, and that's pretty much a podcast panel, so.
I mean, yeah, but also there's usually, like, most places will do a format change of some kind.
Yeah.
Like, I know when Cracked would do their live podcast, they'd have like 5 guests, but each guest would come on one at a time, and it's only at the end that they would have a big discussion with everyone.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I feel like that's just a way to manage it. Because otherwise, I don't know if you've how many podcasts you've listened to with like 4, 5, 6 people. I don't necessarily know who's who when they're talking a lot of the time.
Sure. And, despite our good rapport, there are plenty of instances where you and I talk over each other. So adding more to the cacophony, I can see the downside to that.
I'm sorry. I don't know if these people wanted to hear a big technical discussion about how we format our podcast, but actually, you know what? I don't care. Y'all just heard it.
Yeah.
We love you.
As always, if you like it, go make your own podcast. But we love you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. We're glad you're listening. We're glad you downloaded. We don't make any money off of this, at least not yet. So we'll let you know if like it ever comes to that.
Okay, so let's get into the actual show and cut this Marin short. So last week, my hate was on an author, kind of, pretty much. And
he's an author.
Yeah,
he's an author.
Yes.
All right. How the fuck do you write so many books so fast?
Last week my hate was on an author, and this week my love is on an author. And it was funny how that worked out. I guess I'm on a literary kick.
Yay.
But my love this week is the late, great Hunter S. Thompson. And for anybody who that name doesn't ring a bell, he's the guy who wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He has been called one of the greatest comedic writers of our century. He invented a form of journalism, gonzo journalism. He was a wonderfully caustic, just insane, wonderful man, and he is he's one of my favorite authors, so I felt it was only prudent to talk about him today.
Okay, I'm in. I like books. I like writers. I consider myself one. So I'm definitely interested. Hunter S. Thompson is... I wouldn't qualify myself as a fan of his. I read Fear and Loathing, probably 10 or 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember liking it. It was part of this like weird survey I decided to create for myself of like post-beat writers. And, it was fine. I think for me, I didn't know necessarily what the hype was about.
Yeah.
And that's the only Thompson I've read. Full disclosure.
Okay.
So I'm interested in and gonzo journalism is definitely an interesting topic that I would love to dive into. So feel free. I'm a partially knowledgeable participant, but I definitely have room to learn on this. So feel free to teach.
Absolutely. My love is on the man as much as it's about his literary works. I'm going to give people another peek behind the curtain. Normally, we write each other an email of our notes and kind of hit on the highlights, and then I like to write a physical other page of notes just for whatever reason. Normally, it's a page. This time, I wrote 3 before I realized it.
Okay.
So we went long on the last one. I'm going to try my best not to let us go long on this one. I'm going to be as concise as possible, but I do like teaching people about things and other people. So I'm going to get into a very brief bio of the man. He was born July 18th, 1937 in Louisville, Kentucky, and lived in Kentucky for most of his adolescence. In high school, he became friends with Porter Bibb, who was the original publisher of Rolling Stone magazine. Mm-hmm. And Rolling Stone, it turns out, was created because Thompson told his friend, "Hey, you have to make this magazine." So that's a fun little fact.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
I mean, I was a huge fan of Rolling Stone.
Yeah, right. It's okay. one of the greats. Hunter S. Thompson did not graduate high school because he was in jail at the time. Metal, right? Back when you could just throw a 16, 17-year-old in jail for the week and not think about it. Mm-hmm. So instead he joined the Air Force and was stationed at Fort Elgin in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. And it's there that he got his first professional writing job covering a local football team. And he actually had to ghostwrite his articles because airmen were not allowed to have other jobs. But that all worked itself out because he was honorably discharged from the Air Force shortly after for basically being too much of a rebel and rabble-rousing his fellow enlisted men. At this point, Hunter S. Thompson is like 18, whatever, and he pinballs around the Western Hemisphere. You know, he goes from Jersey Shore to New York to San Juan, Puerto Rico, to California, to Colorado, to Brazil, to San Francisco. The man bounces all over the place, doing odd jobs where he can, but also writing for whatever magazine is around for him to write on. And his novel, The Rum Diary, which is probably his second most famous work, was actually loosely based on his time in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
So he's bouncing around, he's doing odd jobs, he's writing where he can, and then in 1965, Thompson puts himself on the map by spending a year with the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. He spends a year kind of observing them, kind of being the writer in their midst. He's the Jane Goodall to their gorillas.
The fact that they have personalities, they have emotions like happiness, sadness, fear. They communicate with kissing, embracing, holding hands.
And spends a year studying these people and writing about it, which, you know, the Hells Angels, they were the most notorious, feared motorcycle gang in the country at that time, and no one had really done this sort of deep cover writing piece to really understand these people.
Yeah, what year was this?
This was 65.
65. Okay, so this is before Altamont, where the Hells Angels famously stabbed a man during a Rolling Stones set. And this was before Tom Wolfe's Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test had a passage that was a little more, I'll call it sympathetic. I wasn't strictly sympathetic, but it wasn't, like, awful towards them.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Thompson was not really sympathetic. He was doing the thing that he does, which would be pure subjective truth as he saw it. And he didn't write necessarily kindly about these guys. He wrote about being at parties and, you know, everyone's drinking and hanging out and having a great time, and all of a sudden you look in the next room and a gang rape is going on. He wrote about the fighting. He wrote about how the lead dude would beat his wife and no one would care about it. And his relationship with the Hells Angels actually ended after they got into an argument over the Hells Angels wanted a cut of the money he was making off of these articles and books and whatever. Thompson refused, and they kicked the shit out of him. So that's how his time with the Hells Angels ended. But that's that coverage of the Hells Angels and putting that into the National Observer and Rolling Stone and eventually making a book out of it. That is what put Hunter S. Thompson on the map as a literary figure. Mm-hmm. So to wrap up, in 1967, he's still in San Francisco, and he basically fell in love with the hippie movement. And got real big into the drug scene and real enthralled by what was going on in San Francisco at the time, before shortly becoming frustrated with their lack of political convictions and what he perceived as wanting escapism more than wanting to change policy. Mm-hmm. You know, the thing that's so interesting about Hunter S. Thompson, he is basically the most left-leaning conservative, and by the same token, he is the most right-leaning hippie I've ever seen. The man was an avid gun enthusiast, but he was also a personal drug enthusiast. He was anti-establishment, but he was anti-drug profiteering. You know, the man was...
He sounds like a libertarian.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, libertarian...
I mean, libertarians, they're a co-opted movement at this point, thanks to the Koch brothers, but it sounds like he's kind of following a blueprint of libertarianism that is functionally its own singularity.
Yeah.
Like, he really is trying to focus on an individualist stance in the strictest terms.
Pretty much, yeah. You know, I don't know if he had a name for it back then, but that's accurate. You know, he was about doing what you wanted to do for yourself, as long as you're not exploiting other people, and he was very much against corruption. He was very much against what he saw as a vile and corrupt Republican movement. The man hated Richard Nixon with the passion of 1,000 burning suns.
And once I'm swept into office, I'll sell our children's organs to zoos for meat, and I'll go into people's houses at night and wreck up the place.
But he also was disappointed by the hippie movement, because I think he saw that as a chance to change something, and everyone else saw that as a chance to widen your mind, man. But in any case, eventually he moves to Aspen, Colorado, and this is when he stops pinballing around the country. He had a property in Aspen for the rest of his life, famously ran for sheriff of Aspen, and publicized it, and said he was on the freak power ticket, and only lost because the Republican candidate conceded, so that all of the anti-Hunter S. Thompson votes could go to one candidate. So he's basically, the vermin supreme of the early 70s.
Okay.
And so in 1970, Hunter S. Thompson is hired to go cover the Kentucky Derby with the artist Ralph Steadman. And this is incredibly important for two different reasons. This article he wrote, which is titled "The Kentucky Derby is Decadent and Depraved," was sort of the de facto birth of gonzo journalism. And also, introducing him to Steadman created the look. You know, anybody who's read Fear and Loathing, anybody who's seen most of his late articles, that insane art style, which looks like Pablo Picasso on meth, with ink blots everywhere, and just that ugly, gross style. That's Ralph Steadman, and I love that art style so much. You know, one of my one of the favorite gifts that my wife has ever given me was actually a book Ralph Steadman illustrated about the life of Sigmund Freud, and that's like reading an acid trip.
Okay.
So he writes this article, and it is pure what they call gonzo journalism. After the fact, you know, somebody's asking Hunter S. Thompson, what inspired you? What do you do? What are your influences? And off the top of his head, he just goes, I do gonzo. So what is gonzo journalism? It is defined as journalism that is written without claims of objectivity. It's often first person. It's energetic, satirical, critical of society, undetached, and, you know, basically cuts through the bullshit, the politeness that more objective journalism does, and instead favors a kind of stream of consciousness, unedited style. It's actually very important for the craft that it is unedited, and Thompson would famously wait until it was too late to edit any of his articles to publish anything in, so that nobody had a chance to change his words or force him to do a rewrite. And so you've read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Anybody who's read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, that is gonzo. You know, it's this stream of consciousness, and this, I'm going to tell you what's happening as I see it. These are my thoughts. These are my perceptions, style of writing. And when you add that to the fact gathering mission of journalism, you get something totally different. You get this form of talking about a thing that I find very refreshing, and I really enjoy.
So I think about Fear and Loathing now, and again, it's been, probably 12 years since I've read it, maybe.
Yeah.
The thing I remember about Fear and Loathing was this. I read it following a period of time when I had just gotten done reading a lot of beat writers, and specifically Jack Kerouac.
Sure.
And Kerouac was a huge influence on Thompson. They didn't like each other, but they were definitely influences, or Kerouac was an influence on Thompson's writing. And Kerouac was obsessed with this idea of writing the way a jazz saxophonist plays. Like this idea of a stream of consciousness put directly onto the page, unfiltered language being the most pure form of experience. Ultimately, Kerouac, any Kerouac book you read is edited. He didn't want it to be edited, but though that's no publisher in their right mind was going to be like, hey, we're not going to edit this long, rambly, stupid thing that you wrote. Like, we know you sell, but this is dumb, and I know how many uppers you're on. Please, for the love of God, we're just going to do some edits on it.
Right.
I guess Thompson probably, his stream of consciousness thing, the thing is, people took the narrative of Kerouac's stream of consciousness, ignored or were ignorant of the fact that he was edited, and managed to actually push through on a stream of consciousness level. And Thompson was one of the people who definitely did benefit from that.
Yeah.
What I always find interesting about gonzo journalism is less the stream of consciousness aspect than the outright claiming absolutely no objectivity. Just the idea of this is pure, unadulterated, my perspective as a journalist embedded in this situation. Because before that, the idea, the journalistic standard, and to an extent this still exists. Anyone who reads your local newspaper or just watches a standard news report, there's this idea of journalistic integrity, journalistic objectivity, which is a lie.
This is a Fox News special presentation.
It was always a lie. It was an ideal, and it's not necessarily a terrible ideal to strive for, but the idea that any journalist could, completely separate themselves, their own experience, their background. The thing is, even the language that you use in writing forms a sense of subjectivity. And to me, gonzo journalism was always an acknowledgement of that and saying, we can never be fully objective. So why try to be objective at all?
Right, absolutely. This is 1970. This is coming out of the Summer of Love. This is coming out of the 60s. And before that, this is coming out of the nuclear family 50s. This is coming out of a time where there was no Fox News.
And good evening from Washington. I'm Shepard Smith.
There was no read between the lines. We obviously have our own viewpoint, but we're gonna pretend it is purely objective. You had people that were claiming objectivity, and whether or not that's actually the case, Thompson was one of the first people to basically go, no, screw that. I can't promise objectivity, so I'm not even going to try. This is purely, I'm going to let you into my head as I go do this thing, and all of my biases and all of my opinions, you're going to go on the ride with me, and you're going to feel them as strongly as I feel them.
I forgot about the beer. You want some? How about some ether?
What?
Never mind.
That kind of gets in the way of what journalism is supposed to be, but it's like you said, if we believe that nobody is actually objective anyway, and that it is only something you can strive for, personally, I do like the idea of just going, you know what? No, it's not possible to do that, or at least it's not possible to do that in a way that anybody is going to care about and read about, so I'm not going to do that.
It's an honest philosophical question. Like you just said what journalism's supposed to be or what it strives to be. I think that's a question that consumers of media don't ask themselves but need to ask themselves. Like, Especially now, like I know you said you wanted to keep this section short, but I feel like this is a really interesting idea.
Oh, go for it.
So we look now at a time when the media that we consume is kind of tailor-made to us. And that's arguably the fault of the fact that, you know, the Fourth Estate is a capitalist endeavor.
Yeah.
Like, when the point of... It used to be that news was, like, you had your 3 channels on the TV. They showed the news. They understood that the news was going to be not a profitable period. Like, sure, they still sold their advertising for it, but the idea was we're investing in news. We're hiring reporters. We're giving them room to do their journalism, not because we need to make money, but because it is a public good. These were private entities that understood that and made that a point. You know, your newspapers existed with the news reporting and the opinion section and the advertisers all on 3 separate floors, so to speak, whether literally or figuratively. Like they made a point of making it so that they did not intertwine with each other.
Yeah.
And now where print media is dying, nobody really watches the news on TV, or if they do, they watch the 24-hour news cycle, which is its own separate rant. But we tailor our journalism to be the things that reinforce our worldviews. Every one of us does this, and if you're not doing it, you're being very deliberate about it, and also you might be lying to yourself. The idea of this kind of journalism being something where you have a stated take. You know what the viewpoint... If you've read 3 Hunter S. Thompson articles, you know the viewpoint you're going to get on Hunter S. Thompson. You know the viewpoint you're going to get in all the future articles that you read from him.
Yeah.
So you decide for yourself, is that a viewpoint that will reinforce my views? Is it one that will challenge my views? And what do I actually want? It's a question that responsible media consumers should ask themselves, even if they don't. Does that make sense?
No, that absolutely makes sense. And, you know, my opinion on that is that... Sorry, let me rejigger my train of thought. No, because, I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying. You know, my opinion is that you're absolutely right and correct, and it's the responsible thing to do, but people are sheep for the most part. You know, there's the Tommy Lee Jones quote about in Men in Black, a person's smart.
Person is smart.
People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it.
The idea that, yes, we should understand our media sources' biases is absolutely true, but so few people actually do that.
Yeah.
And with Thompson, I think at the very least, he was one of the first people to just outright do this. And like you said, you read 3 of his works, you know what his viewpoints are. The thing that I think kind of saves his journalistic integrity as much as possible is the fact that he was so anti-everything. You know, we've talked about he disliked the right-wing crew-cut policemen just as much as he disliked the long-haired hippie wasters. You know, maybe it's because I feel like I definitely jive with his kind of true good frame point. This idea that, you know, somewhere in the middle of everything is the right way to go. Maybe I personally jive with that, and I jive with Hunter S. Thompson's viewpoint, and that's why it's easy for me to sit here and go, oh, but he was doing a good thing. But I think that his viewpoint was a noble one. You know, for all the drugs he was doing, for all the mescaline in the desert, this idea that he wanted people to be honest and wanted people to be noble for nobility's sake, not noble because you're going to get something, power, money, whatever, out of it, but noble because it is the right thing to do. And this idea of everybody has a face that they put on in public, everybody has a mask that they wear that hides their true intention, and the thought of getting rid of that mask and just being your true insane self definitely appeals to me. 'Cause it's all of the
sun. No, I get that. We had this giant talk about existentialist and absurdist philosophy talking about BoJack Horseman.
Yeah.
And I feel like this kind of fits as a nice little addendum onto that concept because, for Thompson, there's this idea of, not to get into the weeds of a whole nother philosophy, but anyone who's ever read Immanuel Kant understands the idea of moral objectivism and the idea of what a proper moral act, like Kant argued that morality is definable and is objective across all situations, and that even in terrible situations, objective morality is still clear, whether or not you choose to follow it. And Thompson seemed to very much fall into this line of there is an objective moral truth here, and it's not the thing you're being fed, because the thing you're being fed is either this leftist, not really leftist, because I'm never going to call the hippie movement properly left, but like there is this like there's an anti-establishmentism or an anti-establishment message that is really just insincere escapism. It's people of privilege basically playing in a garden and ignoring responsibility for the sake of anti-establishmentism or being anti-establishment. And then there is an actual establishment form, and that form it exists for the sake of either profit or power or control or superstition or any of these things that Thompson actively loathed. And in the face of that, his answer was trying to speak a kind of truth to power and self-medication.
Yeah.
Those were kind of his two ways of dealing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that perfectly sums up his negative thoughts on the counterculture movement and what he perceived as its failures.
And I don't know if this will blow your mind or not, but funny thing is, when we talk about Thompson's political views, do you know which political philosophy he apart from the drugs, do you know what political philosophy he sounds most in line with in the United States?
Well, you said libertarian earlier, but is it...
No.
Okay.
Black Pantherism.
Huh. Okay.
He has the most, they are strongly in favor of community organization and community arming.
Yeah.
They are extremely anti-authoritarian, anti-establishment, anti-police, anti-military, anti-republicanism. They call out the moderate liberalism for reinforcing a status quo that completely undercuts any progress from the lower classes. They stand in solidarity with other marginalized classes.
Well, all right. Yeah.
Thompson, drugs aside, Thompson could fit right in with Huey Newton and the Black Panthers.
Huh. Yeah. Well, there you go. Learn something new. I completely agree with that. That's awesome. Okay.
I might do a future love on the Black Panthers, but that's going to be besides the point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's continue on.
So just carrying on, in 1972, or not 19, yes, in 1972, he writes Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and I don't want to get too much into that. I don't think we need to, other than it is a book that I very much enjoy. And the thing that I think a lot of people miss the point of with both the book and the movie, it's not a book about two dudes randomly going into Vegas in the desert to do a suitcase full of drugs. And that is the point of the book. It's not this with nail and eye, 200 pages of a guy doing coke and ether. It has all that. It absolutely, I think a lot of people can quote the passage where he's listing off the literal briefcase of drugs that they have, but it's about two guys going into the desert to do a bunch of drugs, but also it's in pursuit of trying to actually catch the American dream. And there's this wonderful passage at the end of the book and towards the end of the movie where he's talking about, basically how he failed to find this thing. He wanted to pin down the beautiful, wonderful American dream and wrap his hands around it, and you can't because it's not there anymore. It's been killed and zombified and perverted.
And with the right kind of eyes, you can almost see the high water mark. That place where the wave finally broke and rolled back.
And the mixture of the 50s conservatism and the failure of the 60s counterculture, those two things helped kill the American dream, in Thompson's opinion. And I think that there's a sad kind of beauty and a sad kind of yeah that makes sense to that whole notion, and that's why I like the book. It's less about and the movie as well. The movie's fun because you get to see the insanity, but it's less about arguing about buying an orangutan while you're super high and more about this great thing, this thing that people across the world used to long for is dead and gone and buried. So that's my thoughts on Fear and Loathing.
Yeah, I get that. I think the reason, and I don't think this is Thompson's fault, I think the reason why that message doesn't come through for a lot of people is because the American dream was commodified for a very long time.
Yeah.
People were writing about that 50 years before Thompson. The modernists were writing about that. Hemingway and Fitzgerald were writing about that while publishing books that took place in the Roaring 20s that came out during the Great Depression. Sure. With the understanding of this is what we were, this is what we thought we were, and now the crushing reality of your life and the aftermath of World War I, the greatest war of all time. Like, your American dream is a lie. Here's everything about that lie. And then the Beats did it again after World War II, and they said, hey, you may see Frank Sinatra up there snapping his fingers, but there's this barren landscape of cynical darkness that has followed in World War II. The Vietnam writers did this. Like, people have been telling this story in a way for 50 years. Thompson was coming in kind of with the newest update of it. That's not to say his version wasn't sincere. It's to say that he added on the concept of the counterculture and the failure of that. Because those books were, those people were using the Beats to kind of buoy their point. And Thompson's writing about that failure. And by that point, by the 70s, after 50 years of people telling you the American dream is dead, probably longer. My education into American literature gets a little hazy in the 19th century. That's purely my fault. But it's possible it could have been going on even longer than that. You could argue Steinbeck was doing the same thing way back in the day. But with Thompson, it's kind of like, yes, okay, the American dream is dead. Jesus Christ. I'm waiting in line for my sandwich and Coke. I'm on my lunch break. Shut the fuck up, Hunter S. Thompson.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there's a point where the American dream was a commodity. Now the death of the American dream is a commodity, and then it just continues. That's if you can make $1 out of saying how terrible it is that people are making $1 out of desolation, cynicism is understandable.
Sure.
I'd argue it's not excusable, but it's understandable. So
sure.
I think that's why a lot of people kind of didn't get the proper read off of that book. The movie didn't help either, because the movie is not clear at all.
No, the movie, it's Terry Gilliam, and Terry Gilliam at his best is hard to understand.
Yeah.
So I
God, he was, Terry Gilliam was signed on to do the movie version of Watchmen before Zack Snyder got it.
I think I had heard that.
Imagine that. Imagine Terry Gilliam's Watchmen. No.
Okay, so to wrap up the biography of the man and to get a little into more about personally why I like him. In 1972 he also covered the Nixon whoever Nixon was against in 72. I don't quite remember off the top of my head.
Was that Mondale?
No, it was the other
Mondale.
guy. This was the one Nixon won. This was the campaign Nixon won.
What, you thought Walter Mondale won? Like, we've never had a President Mondale, my friend.
Good point.
47 days into his presidency, Mondale handed complete control of the U.S. over to the Soviet Union.
Okay, we're getting off the point. He has another series of articles that got turned into a book called Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail in 72, which really goes in...
McGovern. That was McGovern.
McGovern, yes.
Sorry, that was McGovern.
That was McGovern.
Yeah.
Okay, so he covered, he was on McGovern's side of the issue. He was actually friends with McGovern, but, he covered the McGovern versus Nixon campaign, and that was another thing that got him a lot of fame and notoriety. His intense hatred for Nixon was really shown to light here, and that was kind of the last high watermark for Hunter S. Thompson. He spends the next 33 years or so with his own career doing ups and downs, but basically, in his own words, he got too famous, and he got, like the mystique of Hunter S. Thompson suddenly got in the way of him actually being able to do what he wanted to do, and to do Gonzo, and to have his objectivity, or lack of objectivity. He famously was sent to go cover the Rumble in the Jungle, which was the fight in Africa between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali. Spends the entire week just drunk in his hotel room and never actually saw the fight or covered anything like that. He goes through his ups and downs, but had pretty much lost the spark. And by the end of it, for the last 5 years of his life, from 2000 to 2005, he was doing a weekly column for ESPN. And in a way, it's almost like, okay, Uncle Hunter, here's your spot, and you stay there now, and you do this now. After 5 years of doing this, Hunter Thompson kills himself, and that is. It's not like the ESPN column is what made him do it. There's actually reports of, he was talking to his friends and people about all these projects going on. Hunter S. Thompson had been interviewed extensively in his later life and talked a lot about how getting old really bothered him, and he needed to get a hip replaced, and he was starting to have all these medical issues, and all of these factors really depressed him. And the story is actually pretty nuts. He's on the phone with his wife saying, hey, come help me write this column, come back to Colorado and help me finish this thing, and cocks a gun and shoots himself on the phone. And she didn't realize what was going on. She thought it was the sound of a typewriter, and nobody found his body for a few hours. He had written a suicide note which reads like poetry. I'm not going to read it out loud, but it was basically talking about he was old. He was old, and he wasn't doing the thing that he wanted to do anymore. And it's interesting. Ralph Steadman has a quote. Hunter S. Thompson had been saying for years that if he didn't know that he could kill himself at any moment, he would have gone insane. And I this isn't like Kinnison, where I have this thing at the ending that really like brings it together for me. Like, this is, I just feel like educating the people about this and talking about this, because I think this is kind of nuts, and it's sad, and we've talked extensively at this point about the tortured tragic artist. I'm not going to try to take that spin on it. It seems like a very Hunter S. Thompson thing to do, to decide, all right, nothing here for me anymore, let's go, and to take a way out.
Yeah.
So the last thing I want to talk about is why I like Hunter S. Thompson. I've talked to everybody about Hunter S. Thompson. I've talked about his books. I've talked about his journalism. I like the guy because he was such a unique character. To be this bizarre, acidic, but at the same time charming, as long as you're not the victim of his ire in the moment. This character back in the 60s and 70s, I think that's so interesting. I think that's so great, and he's had a fair amount of pop culture appearances. You know, there's the Johnny Depp movie before we knew he was a wife-beating shithead, which put Thompson on the map. There's another movie starring Bill Murray called Where the Buffalo Roam, which is about Thompson in the 70s, and it doesn't have as much of a mystique to it as Fear and Loathing, but is an enjoyable movie. There's a character in the Venture Brothers named Hunter Gathers who is very clearly Hunter S. Thompson with the cigar with the long filter and the glasses, and he's basically this Nick Fury character who trained Brock Sampson.
Okay.
And he's delightful. I love the Venture Brothers so much. And my absolute favorite depiction of Hunter S. Thompson in pop culture is in Warren Ellis's comic book Transmetropolitan. I love Transmetropolitan. It's probably going to be a love, but it's basically imagine the world from Futurama, only not a Matt Groening comedy.
Yeah, no, I think I read the first issue. Like, I think I got it promotionally, and I've meant to pick it up, or at least pick up the first couple of I only read trade paperbacks because I'm a cheap bastard. So, but yeah, I've always been meaning to check out Transmetropolitan. I really like that first issue, and I'll read if Warren Ellis wrote the ingredients list on a box of cereal, I would read it.
Yes. Transmet is one of my 2 favorite comic books of all time. It's 100 issues. It is a comic book that has an ending, which we'll get into this probably next episode, I think is vital for any good comic to actually end and to actually be a story that has an ending.
Was that just a sneak peek?
Yes.
Oh shit.
We've been doing them more and more.
All right.
But it's basically the character's name is Spider Jerusalem, and if you've ever seen a bald guy with a spider tattoo and a pair of sunglasses where one lens is green and one lens is red, that's the character I'm talking about. He's Hunter S. Thompson. There's no basically. He is a future Hunter S. Thompson in this decadent dystopia, doing all the heroin he can do and railing against the political system. And that description gives you the idea, but it also sells the comic short. So I give a hearty 5-star, 2 thumbs up recommendation to Transmetropolitan. I think everyone should read it, and it's so good because it is 100 issues of basically Hunter S. Thompson. So no Hunter, no Transmet, and then Andy is sad.
Oh, yeah. We don't want sad Andy.
No. So that's my love, Hunter S. Thompson. He's one of my favorite authors, and it has more to do with the author than the works, but I very much enjoy him.
Oh. So you did a great job keeping it short. We're at about minute 50, 51, something like that. God, I love you. You're the best.
I'm sorry.
You're fine. I don't actually care. But I just love that at the beginning you made a point of being like, we ran long last time, so we're going to try not to run long this time. And nope. We'll see how this one goes, because my hate could be short, could be long. It's vague, so I'm going to be intrigued.
Sure.
All right, so Andy, I'm going to, as I always do whenever I do the hates, or I think when I do the loves too, I'm going to just ask you a little bit of an intro question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. So, Andy, I want you to do me a favor and name a tradition that you or your family had growing up that really sticks out in your mind as a positive experience.
Okay. My family didn't have a ton, but one I can really lean on. During my childhood, it became a tradition that pretty much every spring break we would go, we lived in Colorado at the time. Every spring break we would take a vacation to Orlando and spend a week or 2 at Disney. And that was real positive because, a family vacation. And before we actually lived in Orlando, Disney was a great source of joy for my dad. So that was always great. And it was a fun thing that you knew was coming every year.
Great. So, the family time, the positive experience there. The reason why I wanted to open with that, Andy, is because my topic, my hate for this episode is the very concept of traditions.
Ooh.
And the reason... Did you not read my notes?
I did. I'm building intrigue for you, damn it.
I ruin it. No, so I loathe the ideas of traditions. But I ask you to tell me about a positive experience you had. Not because I want to tear apart your lovely memories of going to Disney with your family, but because I don't want this discussion to come off as me telling you that, your Christmas tradition of putting up the tree together on the 20th every single year, or anything that you do, like if you are of a certain religion and you have yearly rituals around certain holidays or actions, or if your family just has a really awesome tradition that you really enjoy. I don't want you to think that I'm completely shitting on that and telling you it's wrong, you shouldn't do it, or you're dumb for doing it. My problem with tradition is the idea that just because any ritual, practice, or activity is old or has been done for a very, very long time, that one facet of it means that it has inherent value, or that it shouldn't be questioned or eradicated. You follow me so far?
No, I got you.
Yeah. So to kind of give some idea here, there are positive traditions that might be, say, attached to cultural or religious customs or rituals, or have long histories that might help some of the current practitioners of that feel kind of a sense of heritage or lineage. I'm gonna possibly talk about a practice in Judaism that I have some issues with, but when I think about positive ones, I don't see anything wrong with things like Passover seders, even with bar and bat mitzvahing or something like that. And those are things that have a positive value, because think about something like a Passover. It is a story that can create a sense of cultural identity for people of a certain faith. Yeah. I think about, I grew up Catholic. There were rituals that we participated in through Catholicism that I didn't know a lot of other people doing. Like, Andy, did you ever do Three Kings Day? I know you grew up Protestant.
I never did. I didn't realize people did until like a year or so ago, when a couple of friends of ours, we were making plans, and they're like, "Oh no, we can't. It's Three Kings Day. We're going spending time with the family." And we're like, "Oh, people actually do that."
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a tradition with my mom where she set up a nativity scene at the beginning of the Christmas, the beginning of kind of the Christmas season. And like every day of December, like there's this nativity scene, and there is, Jesus and Joseph walking up to the manger. And every day, like my job was to move the Mary and Joseph a little bit farther. And then on Christmas Eve, we'd put them in the manger, and we had a little baby Jesus we would stick in there with a little angel on top. And Aww. It was really nice. Yeah. And then after Christmas, she put the Three Kings out, and we would have the Three Kings make the same journey all the way until Three Kings Day. That ritual meant a lot to me. It was a way that me and my mom kind of bonded with one another.
Sure.
Here's the problem, is that ritual had use beyond the fact that it was something me and my mom just did. We bonded over it. We'd done it most of my life, and, when it stopped for, decent reasons. We had other things going on. I was a little bit older. We stopped getting out of it what we had in it before, because before it was something wherein my mom could give me a little bit of religious pride. I definitely felt a sense of cultural heritage celebrating Three Kings Day, because
Sure.
Latinos seem to do it more than other Catholics, I've realized.
Yeah.
Like, I've met Irish Catholics who celebrate it. I've met Irish Catholics who don't, but I meet very few Latino Catholics who don't do Three Kings Day. The point is that it's not that we had other things other than the fact that it was fucking old or always done a certain way that was positive. The issues that I run into, though, is I keep skirting around this. Their tradition... No, it's uncomfortable. There are toxic traditions. There are absolutely fucking toxic traditions. They're in families. They are in cultures. They are in faiths.
Yeah.
They are in nationalities. and they are not questioned. And that's a problem to me. That is disingenuous, and it often causes a lot of harm. I talked about a Jewish tradition that I have no problems with, no issues with. Another one that I have actually, Andy, people have paid me money to write about this particular topic before. So I feel like I get to say this.
Sure.
Circumcision. I'm not going to have a talk about circumcision, whether or not it should be done, shouldn't be done. That might be a topic for a future podcast. But I will tell you this story. A few years ago, there was a news report that there were a number of babies in the New York metropolitan area who had been diagnosed with herpes.
Oh, okay.
And a couple of them died because of it.
Sure.
And people were trying to figure out, why do these babies have herpes? Why do babies, these fucking babies, have herpes? Practically newborns, within a first year. The common thread between them was that all their families were of a very particular... All the families were Jewish, not an issue. All of them were participants in a particular sect where the rabbis still performed the bris in the traditional way. The traditional way meaning snipping it with a very old school type of device, and then the rabbi removing the foreskin with their mouth.
Jeez.
That's how they did it way back in the day.
Sure, right.
And most practitioners, by a very significant margin, do not practice it this way anymore. Circumcision is still traditional, you still do have brisses, but the practices have been updated so that they're A, much more sanitary, B, much less creepy, and C, a rabbi with herpes can't give herpes to a baby.
Yeah, that's the part that I'm just not pleased by. The idea of some dude had herpes of the mouth and was contracting it to all these babies because he was the rabbi.
Yep, because he was the rabbi and he was doing it in the traditional way, the very, very traditional way. And the argument for doing it the traditional way is that's how we've always done it. That's how it's written about in our books. That is the proper way to do this tradition. And that's not an acceptable argument.
No.
That's a tradition that, it's important for me to not appear intolerant. Again, I'm not making my circumcision argument here. I have my opinions about the subject, but that's not what I'm getting at here. I'm getting at this one particular practice done in an infinitesimal minority of situations. But because it's a tradition, people got seriously... Babies, there are children who died because of this.
Right.
There was one or two that died. And the last time, I admit, I have not followed up on this story since I read it several years ago. But the last I read, this guy was still practicing. This is still... Yeah, this is not a legal practice, by the way. It's against the law, but they're still doing it because it's important for these families to do things the traditional way.
Right.
And that's not okay.
No.
I'm sorry, you were about to say something?
Well, so we're inching up to the thing that I absolutely agree with you as to why traditions are not okay, particularly the faith-based ones. And, I have my own beliefs, so I'm not sitting here as someone who is completely outside of this, but the notion of do it or else you're angering God or whomever your religion, your higher power religion says, do this because if you don't, it is against X's will. And as someone with my own beliefs, I absolutely say that is a load of crap. And you've just brought up probably the best example for how that can negatively is such a nice way of saying it, how that can be horrible for a family or an individual. And it doesn't even have to be the faith-based ones. You as you were talking about all these babies that were dying, you got me thinking about anti-vaxxers.
Yeah.
And I think anti-vaxxing absolutely could be classified as a tradition and is absolutely a batshit stupid, improper, unsafe thing to be doing to one's children.
Sure, you say that, but where's the proof? Where's the evidence?
Yeah. So I live in Asheville, which is a place that's well known for. It's funny, we were talking about Thompson earlier. That's well known for a hippie contingent, more or less.
Yeah.
Definitely kind of that like new agey kind of thing. So I encounter a lot of stuff that I don't personally believe in, but you know what? That's fine when people aren't hurting each other. And the thing of it is, there are, and for a lot of people, this is a return to a sense of tradition in a lot of ways. And in some ways, that can be really interesting or fascinating. There's a lot of private doulas around this area. Are you familiar with what a doula is, Andy?
Yes, a doula is somebody who assists in the birth.
Yeah. Now, for me personally, I mean, I've been in the room for a birth. I had super medical births. Like, we were in hospitals. I can name the hospital. Like, I've driven by it. I've seen it. Like, I know it. Like, it's cool. But if somebody, you know, has been practicing some of this, you know, for a good long time, if they come with references, if a parent or set of parents or family chooses to go with like a doula route and not, you know, and do the birth in the home or any of that stuff, like at the end of the day, I don't really have a criticism of that. That's fine if people choose to do that. I would say if that parent also doesn't have, you know, a hospital backup in case there's an emergency, that they're probably, you know, not doing their due diligence. But, like, that's a return to tradition that I kind of, like, okay, that's fine. I can understand that.
Sure.
But this same group of people, not specifically doulas, I just mean the same kind of demographic of usually moderately privileged, spiritual but not religious group of nice white liberal folk are largely, like, a huge contingent of them are there in the anti-vaxxer movement, and that ain't okay.
No.
And people say, and people will say something like, "Oh, you know, kids were fine before vaccinations." I'm like, no, they weren't. Do you know what infant mortality used to be?
You know another really good business? Teeny tiny baby coffins.
Do you know what child polio looks like? Yeah, no, like, I think
In my family, there are people who were pregnant 15 times and only had 10 kids.
right.
What? And that was some shit. That's how it used to be. And this was not that many generations ago. This was enough generations ago that I met these family members.
Sure. No,
and I'm not that old.
It's funny, bring it back to Thompson, just a fun fact. He was the oldest of 3, but his mom was pregnant 8 times.
There you go.
So there's the statistic the other way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not of the opinion that new ways are always the best. I'm not. That's you know, I think there's a How I Met Your Mother storyline where Barney's obsessed with the idea that, like, new is always best. And I remember that philosophical idea. And in there it's like it's played in that How I Met Your Mother way where Barney's talking about one thing, but Ted takes a new lesson from it another way. And it's very nice, very simple, you know, it's okay.
Ted, I know you love crappy old stuff no one cares about.
I don't believe new is always best. I don't believe that, you know, science and medicine have every answer, because that's the point of science and medicine. They're doing their best to find the best answer available with current means, methods, testing, availability, etc.
Right.
Like, that's part of the point. And some things do legitimately have decent grounding in the past. But the point is they have to be examined very carefully. And being old, like, it turns out, did you know that bleeding actually can have some decent effect on certain diseases?
Diseases? No. I thought you were going to say just, like, as a whole, and I was going to say, yeah, reduce pressure, but no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, there are certain conditions that bleeding can be a little bit helpful for, certain infectious diseases. Leech treatment is kind of being experimentally, carefully brought back because it's showing certain, you know, it's showing resilience for certain things. Now, should you be bled if you have headaches like they used to?
Right.
No. That is a bad plan. It's not a catch-all. The point is that there are certain things that were done traditionally that have merit, but they have merit not because they were old. Again, that's what I keep getting back to. Did you ever know kids growing up whose parents were like, I feel like this is a very boy thing, but did you ever know parents who were like, well, I played such and such sport, so it only makes sense that my son will be invested in playing such and such sport. Have you ever encountered that? Because I totally have.
I can't say that I did. Oh, actually, okay, not sports, but the Boy Scouts.
Okay.
Because that was the case for me. You know, my dad was a Boy Scout and wanted me to be one as well. And you know, I would like my son, if I have one, to join it. And so yeah, there you go.
Okay, so what if you have a son who's like, Dad, Boy Scouts suck shit,
then
and I don't want to do it?
You know, in the moment, I'm going to go here and say, then my son doesn't have to do Boy Scouts. I don't think that it's something that has to happen, you know?
Yeah. And that's a healthy attitude towards a potential tradition. Like, it's possible. Like, legacies are a huge thing. They are.
Right, yeah.
But the problem... and that can be great, you know? Honestly, that can be a terrific thing. But, you know, I meet people... Someone very close to me, who I won't name because I love them, is very into their alma mater. Like, super into their alma mater. It's very... Like... You know that stereotype of, like, the rich old white guy who's like, I'm a Yale man.
Right.
So, obviously, my children will all be Yale people.
Right.
Like, I'm watching Gilmore Girls with Stephanie right now, and, like, there's a whole thing there where he's like, I'm a Princeton man. No, I think he says I'm a Yale man, and Rory really wants to go to Harvard, and, like, his mother's like, well, you went to Yale. She should go to Yale. All of the family is Yale people. And I'm like, that's some bullshit. Someone in my own life, you know, has straight up told me that if their child does not go to the same university that they did, they will feel a deep sense of hurt and rejection. This child is still a baby. This child is learning to talk, and their parents have already decided you're going to this college that I went to because it's a tradition.
Yeah, You've seen that in pop culture enough. It should almost seem obvious that it's setting oneself up for fail, not even for college, but to be here and say, my daughter is going to be a horseback rider. And you pay all this money for your daughter to have horseback riding lessons. And then when she's 13, she could give a shit about horseback riding.
Yeah, because she wants to join a punk band or something.
Right.
Like...
That speaks to, in my opinion, a weakness of the parent. This idea that you're so fragile that your progeny can affect you in that way.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie to you. This one I don't mind saying aloud. But I have a little nephew. And his father is super into cars and is like trying to get his son into cars. His son also, like the other person, his son is like just learned how to walk, like super young, but he has like car decorations all over the nursery, and he wants to take him to like some street rally race that he races in, and he's like really wants his son to be into cars. And I'm sitting here just being like, God, I hope you're a drummer. I hope he's a drummer, just so that my brother-in-law is like, but I wanted to do the car. Why don't you do the cars? And I can just be like, ha ha ha, he's a drummer. Like, that's the troll uncle in me right now. But like, I in fairness, I have confidence. Like, if he's not into cars, like, I don't think his father will be like, you are no son of mine. Like, I don't think they have that kind of setup. Like, I think he'll be disappointed, but he'll get over it. The same way, like, I'm sure, like, my dad was disappointed that I wasn't good at sports, because my dad was an athlete.
You're no son of mine. No, you're no son of mine.
He got over it, and he was like, okay, well, he's got good grades, and he likes this theater thing, and he plays guitar. It's fine. He's well-adjusted, he's happy, he's healthy. At the end of the day, I don't give a shit. Like...
Well, and that's the way I think you should be, honestly. I mean, you know, there's the argument to the sports thing is, oh, kids are taciturn, and you know, if he says he doesn't want to do it when he's 7, you know, and you believe him, he's going to want to say he's going to want to do it when he's 8, and it's like, yeah, but I think let your kids do what they want to do and what makes them happy. And if you share an interest with your child, bully for you. I'm glad that's something you can bond over. But, you know, your relationship as a parent shouldn't be diminished just because maybe you don't have the same interests. And I think your dad's a good example of that.
That's true. But also, I mean, here's the thing. I don't know if you experienced this when you got married, but did you have a bunch of family members come out of the woodwork and tell you about how their weddings went and how they wish you would do the same thing?
No. Now, in fairness, Mariah and I shut that shit down. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that is a factor too. But the thing is, like, a lot of us get born into these traditions, into these concepts of what we should or should not be. And there's a tremendous guilt when those traditions don't work for who we are as people. You know, every time I reject a gender culture, a gender-based role that my parent, like, I'm a flat out put it out there. Like, I'm Latino, and anyone, and granted, if you're outside of Latino culture and you're calling it out for this, you might be a racist. But as a member of this culture, I will flat out say it is a misogynistic, heteronormative, homophobic culture in many, many ways. It is a culture where, and again, anyone who tells you this isn't the case is not paying attention or lying to themselves. It is a culture where it is acceptable to hit your children for not conforming to gender roles. And it's because there's a traditional concept of what you are supposed to be a stereotypical, straight, heteronormative child that conforms to the gender you were assigned at birth, and you don't step out of that. And I've got queer members of my family who aren't open with all of the family because the fact of the matter is there's people who will write them out because they're not following the cultural tradition.
Sure.
There are members of the family where, even me, you know, they're members of the family that I have to be careful of how much I talk to them because they don't like my atheism.
Right.
Because you were baptized, fue bautismo, en la iglesia de Dios, you were baptized in the Church of God. You know, we have done everything right. Your mother did everything right. Why aren't you conforming to this? And that doesn't work for me. Therefore, I have to carry the guilt of that. And it's only when I decided I don't carry the guilt of that anymore. And this isn't just the religion. This is also, you know, the gender roles. This is the fact that I don't necessarily know, well, I know for a fact, if Stephanie and I have a family, it probably will not look like the family that I had growing up, or that a lot of the rest of my family has. And that is a problem for a lot of people, I know, because they've told me it's a problem for them.
Right.
Because I'm not conforming to a traditional model. And that is unacceptable because the only thing that traditional model has is, the only argument for it is that it's old and the way it's always been. And that is a bullshit argument made in bad faith that is unacceptable and needs to be eradicated. It does not deserve to exist. If your family model has validity, if it actually imparts something that is useful, that is great. But like, I honestly kind of like the model where, you know, grandparents are heavily involved in their kids' lives.
Sure.
I really like that model, and that's really traditional in Latino culture. It's not always available. It wasn't available to me. My grandparents were had either passed away or were on another continent. But I see a lot of value in that model a lot of the time. But I see value in it because if you have grandparents to your kids who have a good relationship with them, who aren't shitheels, who will not give them tremendous problems when they don't conform to certain ideas, if they're cool, they have to fit in the scenario. And if they don't fit in the scenario, the tradition does not deserve to be followed.
Sure.
That's my thesis of this entire thing, is that traditions are bullshit because in and of themselves, just because they shouldn't, they have no right to exist just because they're traditional.
Sure, no, it needs to stand up to scrutiny. And if you get offended at the idea of there being scrutiny at all, then it's probably gonna fail.
Yeah, I'm trying to be the opposite of an old man yelling at a cloud right now.
Good on you, man.
Yeah, like I'm trying to be like a young man yelling at the earth. That's.
You wouldn't understand, Dad. You're not with it.
No, I think you're trying to break a potentially harmful notion. You know, we've talked about how not all traditions are bad, but some of them absolutely are. And if more people could just break out of the headspace, it's interesting you talked about guilt. I didn't even consider that, and that is probably one of the most powerful motivators out there, familial guilt. And you know, absolutely there are people who aren't going to be able to overcome that and are going to, you know, stay in these traditions because of that, and that's not cool. You know, I think it needs to stand up to scrutiny, and I think absolutely it cannot be something that can hurt a child. Hurt anybody, but especially hurt a child.
Yeah. So, you know, no herpes brisses.
Right.
I'll state this personal opinion. I don't believe in spanking. That can be a controversial opinion to voice on the internet.
Sure.
But, like, yeah, I don't believe in spanking. I've read the research. I grew up with it. I don't think it did any good for me. And it's funny because I'll have this argument with some of my... And I'm not shaming parents out there who spank. Like, at the end of the day, you do what you think is best for your child. That's not a hill I'm willing to die on, to be honest. Because, again, I was spanked. I did come out okay, but I don't think it did me any good. Some people argue that spanking teaches respect for parents, and all it taught me was don't get caught, because then you get spanked.
Right.
So it just made me more deceptive and more prone to lying, and and I argue it makes you fear your parents.
Right.
And I argue that you can't respect something you fear.
Yeah, it's a good argument.
Fear is power.
So that's my personal belief there, but you know, spanking was something I traditionally came up with, and it's not a tradition that I care to keep going. And I'm having that argument right now with friends and family who are having kids.
Sure.
And do believe in it. I'm also backed up by friends and family who grew up exactly like me and are like, no, fuck spanking. Like, that's not a thing. But yeah, so and that's fine. It's okay to have the discussion. That's the point, though.
Yeah.
Like, have the damn discussion and have a goddamn bullet point other than, well, that's the way it was for me, or that's the way it's always been.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, that's the key. That's the key to a lot of things, but absolutely in this case, you know, being able to just have a reasoning and have a benefit, hopefully. But no, I agree, man. I didn't think I was going to be falling on an opposite side of this particular fence with you, but I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a vague concept, but I was interested in exploring it. So thank you for coming on that journey with me.
Of course, always, my man.
All right, you ready for this question?
Without further ado, let's get into it.
All right, so we did get a relationship question, and Andy, we are going to have to come up with a call sign for this person.
Sweet.
But it's a short question. So, hi guys, I have a question. Thank you for your question. How can I break up with my hairdresser when she's also my drinking buddy? We were drinking buddies first, and we do that more often. She started doing my hair around a year ago, and it's never really been great. I want to just switch to someone else, but don't want to hurt her feelings or our friendship. Help? That was the whole question.
Help. Yes, we will help.
Yes. For future reference, everyone listening, we will happily take questions like this. No qualms with that at all.
Yep.
We do like more detail rather than less, but we are very, very happy to take your question. Individual who we will now give a name to.
I'm trying to think. Famous drinking buddies.
Famous.
Hey, what's going on, Normie?
My birthday, Sammy. Give me a beer, stick a candle in it, and I'll blow out my liver.
Famous drinking buddies or famous hairdressers. She's not the hairdresser, so I'm leaning drinking buddy. Did you ever watch Cheers?
Yeah.
All right. Hi, Norm.
Norm. I love it. Okay, Norm. All right. So Andy, would you like to start off this discussion for Norm, or should I see if I can get a spearhead?
I'll start with my own thoughts. This one is a little tricky. We care about our friends. This is your friend before it's your hairdresser, so I absolutely get not wanting to hurt your friend's feelings. And I'm trying to come up with a reason you can give other than I don't like the work you've been doing. Because, maybe you just get a new hairstyle, go somewhere else beforehand, and when they see it, be like, oh, I just wanted to change. But I still don't know if that will cause a conflict or not.
I'm going to say right now, that's not a good idea, because if your friend is a hairdresser, they'll know that you got a new haircut, and then it's basically like you just switched without talking to them in the first place.
Sure, yeah, good point there. No, and I figured, of course, the person's going to understand you got a new haircut. Anybody who pays attention would, but I think the key here is parsing how to tell your friend, but not make it clear that you don't dislike them for any other reason than you don't quite like what they've done to your hair. Clearly you're still friends. Clearly you're drinking buddies. You're drinking buddies more often than your client relationship people. Yeah, if you've got a thought, Alex, go ahead. I'm gonna keep trying to.
So I remember a while ago when we were talking to Bishop from Aliens,
Yep.
and not any other kind of Bishop, where his topic was, how do you tell a friend that they're cheating on them, or that their significant other is cheating on them? And the general consensus there was bite the bullet.
Yeah.
You suggested alcohol. Clearly, this is a case where y'all do drink, and that's a great thing. I'm interested that you refer to your hairdresser as a drinking buddy and not as like a close personal friend. Maybe I might be reading a little bit too much into that, but it sounds like this is a fairly casual friendship that you want to keep it going. You also don't give any personality to this other individual, but I think obviously this is not something you want to just grin and bear. Anyone that you have a relationship with where there's this exchange of services, especially something as personal as hair. I mean, I've gone through hell and back trying to find, I think a good barber or hairdresser, much like a good doctor or a good mechanic, like, they're worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, absolutely.
Honestly. My initial instinct when I read this question was like, why would you ask your friend to be a hairdresser for you? Like, that's such a terrible idea. That's like, you never mix like your friends and something like so close and important to you. Like, that's such a bad idea. But that's, that's giving you shit for something that's already happened.
Well, and I will say maybe,
and that's not fair.
I will say maybe they didn't ask. I've got a friend of mine who studied at Aveda, and as she was getting her degree or whatever as a hair person, she was all about, hey, let me give you cuts, let me practice on you, and even after she graduated, she was trying to cut her friend's hair, and for me it was a thing of like, you're my friend, I don't particularly care where my hair gets cut. Yeah, absolutely. If having you cut my hair makes you feel better and gives you a chance to get some more experience, absolutely, cut my hair. So maybe this is a situation like that where Norm got, a little bit roped in. And I find it interesting that this has been going on for a year, and you've grinned and bared it for at least this long. I think that might be part of. So let me go ahead and say I do agree. I don't know why it was harder for me to say just go ahead and you need to bite the bullet and do it for this than for other stuff. But I think you do need to, next time you guys are at the bar, have this conversation. And I think part of the thing you can do to deflect some of the potential conflict is I think you are allowed to say, I've been seeing you for a year. I think I want to see somebody else, because clearly you've given this quite a shot. I don't know how many times you've had your hair worked on in this past year, but it's been a year. I would imagine minimum 3, 4, whatever. You've given this a shot, and you are allowed to not be happy with the product. And, that doesn't speak to this person being a bad friend to you. It doesn't even speak to them being a bad hairdresser per se, but not a good fit for you and your hair.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. You don't really say if your friend is someone who would take it really personally. I don't know if this is your sense of awkwardness or your sense of fear that your friend will just react poorly because of maybe their own personality. We've all got those friends who we're a little worried to give bad news to. They can be a little more on the volatile side. And, that really sucks. It super does. But, I'm assuming that for one thing, you're listening to our podcast, so I assume you're not, close to death, age-wise. That might be assumptive. I don't know. But I would assume you and your friend are going to keep contact for a good while, and I would also assume that they're going to be a hairdresser for a while. So what? Are you going to spend the rest of your life getting haircuts that you're not really into because you're afraid of the conflict? Honestly, this is a situation where I think honesty is a better policy.
Yeah.
I really do. I might have said this before, but, honesty without compassion is cruelty. Don't be cruel. Be compassionate about this. Sit here and go, hey, listen, you're my friend. I love you. I love hanging out with you. I don't want to fuck up our friendship. I don't know about you cutting my hair anymore. If you want to try softening the blow, maybe it's an economic thing. See if you can recommend friends to her. Because again, if the problem isn't that she's a shitty hairdresser, if she's just not working out for you, help find people who might work for her, or get her, feel free to talk her up. Try to get her some extra business. If the problem is purely just a personal thing, you don't want to hurt feelings, tough shit. People get their feelings hurt, and you shouldn't have to suffer for that, And
I was going to add on, if saying, hey, I don't want you to cut my hair anymore ends your drinking buddy friendship,
then it was a shitty friendship.
What thin ice was it on in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, and again, you call them your drinking buddy, so it's probably fairly casual. I don't know if you're in a group of people, and that might make things awkward, but again, there is a right thing to do here, and the right thing to do is to kindly, compassionately, and with, all offerings to try and make up for it as best as can, if appropriate, just do the breakup.
Yeah.
And it is a breakup. It is an honest-to-God breakup. You tell her, hey, this is why it's not working out for me. You don't have to say it's not me, it's you, but you do have to say, I have reasons, they're valid. I am an independently thinking person who can make judgments, and my judgment is this aspect, this relationship as, client and hairdresser is not working. This relationship as friends is working great. And try and lay all of that down. And if, they can't be mature enough to handle that, that's not your fault.
Yeah. No, it's important to know that.
And don't be an agent in your own misery. That might be the best tagline to a lot of our relationship questions or a lot of our answers to these is just, what's the answer where you are not an agent in your own misery?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, there's our advice for you, Norm. You can take Alex and quote him at the ending there, but I think if this is a drinking buddy, if this is a friend that is truly a friend to you, then you're going to be able to get through this just fine. Of course, stay compassionate, but at the end of the day, it's your hair, it's your life, it's your decision, and you are fully allowed to just sit them down. If it's in a group setting, pull them aside, but you're allowed to sit them down and explain that you don't want them to cut your hair anymore.
And it's your money, too.
Yeah.
That's another factor. All right. You think we're good for Norm?
I think we're good, Norm. Feel free to send us a picture of your new hairstyle if you like it.
Yeah, and keep us posted. So far, no one has sent us their follow-ups or anything like that. We're 3 episodes in as far as postings are concerned. So please, we want your follow-ups. We will happily take them. They might make our episodes a little bit longer. We're at 135 now, but
clearly we're not concerned with length anymore.
Yeah, maybe you're not concerned with length, but girth. We're concerned with girth.
There you go. All right, and on the penis note, that has been our show. That has been Love Hate Relationship. I am Andy Boel, and you can follow me at Jovo.
Wait! Relationship problem.
Oh yes, thank you. Just a reminder. If you have a relationship problem with a loved one, coworker, anybody, hairdresser, drinking buddy, anything in between, if you have a person in your life that you are connected to and you are having a problem with that person, please feel free to send your question in to lovehaterelationshippodcast@gmail.com, where we promise we will read them. We have read every one so far.
Yep. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, and even TuneIn Radio, where you can listen along with my mother. And you can also tweet us at LHRPod. That's LHRPOD. With your questions, and you can follow us there to keep up with new episodes.
That's right. You can also find us at lovehaterelationship.net. That is our site. It is lovely. You can follow me, Andy Boel, at JovoCop2113 on Twitter.
And I'm at A_X_RUIZ on both Twitter and Instagram. Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, we love you, and please tell your enemies.